do another. So I'm gonna start reading the next one.
There are 6 times as many union workers as there are non-union workers at the Acme dye plant.
Okay, that's a period.
Yep.
That's where we're gonna stop. There's what now?
There are 6 times as many union workers as there are non-union workers at the the Acme plant,
Okay.
dye plant.
There are 6 times as many union as there are non-union.
Mm-hmm.
So which one is the X?
Union.
6 times.
Non-union.
Which one is the X? Non-union.
No.
Non-union is the X because union tells us it's 6 times as many, right? So that lets you know that the non-union is your X.
Okay.
And the union is 6 times X. How would you write the union?
6x.
6X means 6 times X, right? Okay? Okay. That's what they told us in that first sentence. That's what you should have already. What's the next sentence say?
8.
Go, whoever said that.
8 fewer than the number union workers is equal to 4 times the number of non-union workers.
Okay, it says, what now? 8 fewer
8 fewer than the number
of union workers.
is
How do you write 8 fewer than the number of union workers?
minus 8.
Minus 8,
That's
right?
what I was thinking.
So that's union workers minus 8, right? That's 8 fewer than the union workers,
Mhm.
right? He said it's equal to,
Is equal to 4 times the number of non-union workers.
how do you write 4 times non-union workers?
4x.
4x. See, we took words now and changed them into numbers and symbols. Okay? Just exactly what it said is exactly how we wrote it. Okay? And then what does it say next? Is that it?
How
It
many?
just says how many union workers are there at the plant.
They want to know how many union workers there are, okay? So we know 8 fewer than the union workers is equal to 4 times the non-union workers, okay? So we have it written. Now, when you have numbers on one side and letters on, when they're separated, you see the one we had before, all the X's were on the same side, you see. When you have the X's on both sides, you got to move them. You got to get the X's on one side and the numbers on one side. Okay. Now the way we do that is literally we're going to move this over here and this one over here. The trouble is when we move it past the equal sign, we have to change and do the opposite. So the 6x is going to stay. I'm going to move the 4x over here with it, and the rule of thumb is to move the smaller to the larger number. That way you don't have to worry about ending up with negative numbers for your answer, okay? So the 4x is smaller than the 6x. We're going to bring it over to it, because if I took the 6x over there, it's positive over here because there's no sign with it. When I move it over there, it would have to be negative, so I'm going to have to be taking 6 from 4, and that's going to leave me a negative 2. So I'm going to bring the 4 over here. Now again, anytime there's no sign with the number, you know that the number is positive.
Okay.
So when I move this positive 4 from over here to over here, it's got to become a negative 4. Okay?
Okay.
From there to there, it becomes negative. When I move this 8 from here to here, though, the 8 was negative,
Positive.
it's going to become positive. Okay, again, if numbers are on both sides, you can still do that without moving. But when you have the x's split up, you got to get the x's together. Okay? And so we move the 4x over here. Anytime you move things from one side of the equal sign to the other, you have to do the opposite. Okay? If you were adding it, you have to subtract it. If you were subtracting it, you'd have to add it. If you were multiplying, you'd have to divide it. If you were dividing, you'd have to multiply it. You always do the opposite if you move a number from one side of the equal sign to the other. So now we have 6x take away 4x would leave us what?
2
2 what?
x.
Well, if you had 6 M&Ms and I took 4 M&Ms, what would you have left? 2 what? M&Ms. Whatever you had, that's what you're going to still have, right?
The
So-
sign don't change. I mean,
What change?
never mind.
Here's what you're talking about. Here's how you want to see it, plus a negative 4x, okay? Plus and negative is the same as subtracting, so you never will see them put a plus in there, they'll just, but that's what you're looking for. You're looking for it just because this would have said plus a negative 8, but minus 8 is the same as negative 8. You gotta just understand that.
Okay.
There's no difference in having a minus 8 and a negative 8, they do the same thing, you're still taking 8 away.
Okay.
But if you had this, the rule would be, when you're adding and the signs are different, subtract the smaller from the larger, so it's still just 4 take 6 take away 4. And keep the sign of the larger, which is the 6. Which you'd have got the same thing if I did it here, just
Okay.
6 take away 4, okay? But that's what you were looking for, because you people do get confused when we talk about negatives, then we talk about subtract, because they think it's two different things, but it's not. This is saying you're subtracting a positive, or you're adding a negative, it's the same thing.
Okay.
So we still now have 2x is equal to 8, it's over there. So now it's saying 2 times some number equals 8, what is that number?
4.
X has to be 4. What you actually did was you were multiplying by 2 here, so I divided both sides by 2 to get my answer, but you could just say 2 times 1 is 8. You don't have to actually divide it, but that's what your mind is doing automatically. So, x is 4. Now, that's not the answer to the problem. That's why I always label it. So now I go back and say x is 4. That's the union workers then, right? And the non-union workers. The question is how many union workers? And it says union workers. To find the union workers, you have to do what?
Times 4 and 6.
6 times
4.
whatever x is. And so if x is 4, 6 4s would give you what? 24. So there are 24 union workers. You had to find x. You can't find 6x. But 6x is what you were looking for, because 6x is who the union workers are. And the question was, how many union workers do you have? But you had to solve for x, then put x back in here and see what the answer to your problem was. If they asked you how many non-union workers are there, well, we said non-union workers are represented by x. So that's just 4. But it said union workers is 6 times whatever x is, because there's 6 times more union workers than there are non-union workers. Okay? Now, if it was multiple choice, and you see it's algebra, you shouldn't run away from it if you read and understand. Because if it said there are 6 times as many union workers as non-union workers, and you had a choice and said if there were 3 non-union workers, how many union workers, you know it had to be 18, you see. So it's still, as long as you understand what's going on, as long as you could write the equation, you can use a lot of times logic and common sense to figure out, especially if it's multiple choice. If they say x is equal to 3, you got to put that 3 wherever x is and see if it equals whatever it says it equals. An equation has to work out. You can't have 15 equals 24. You know, and you can't make it equal the same thing. If it said in order to find it, you got to multiply it by 6. You got to do what it says it has to do and see if it comes up right. And if it does, then that's the correct solution for x. If it's not, then it's not. Question, Deborah.
So I always move the smaller number to the
Bigger
other
number.
side. Yeah.
To the bigger number, because, well, we move it to the other side because we want to get the x's together.
Yeah.
We take the smaller one to the larger one, because if I took the larger one, if I had it like this, and I moved this one here, kept the 8 over here, first of all, I got a negative 8. And if I bring it over here, I got to take 6x away, because it's positive over here, it's got to be negative over there. So I'm going to have a negative 8 equals 4 take away 6 is going to give me a negative 2x. I don't want a negative x, I always want a positive x.
Okay.
And so that's why if you take the smaller one to the larger one, you're always gonna get positive.
Okay.
If I get this negative, then I'm gonna end up having to divide each side by -1. So now it changes it to positive, you know, and then I still would have to divide each side by 2. And I'd still get my 4, but that's an extra step to change that negative. So just the rule of thumb. I mean, you can still come up with the answer doing it, but it just takes extra steps to do it because the question is always what is x? Not what is x times 2, what is x divided by 3, what is a negative x, you want to know what is x. So if you came up with a negative x, then you'd have to divide both sides by -1, so it would just leave x by itself. Okay? So let's look at this next one. And I'm going to have you write the equation, okay? There are 3 times as many women in a GED class as there are men. So the men are what?
X.
Men are x, right? Everyone follow that? Because it talked about there being 3 times as many women.
So it's 3x.
So the women are what?
3x.
3x, right? So that's the first thing you should have. You should have written down men x, women 3x. Because at the end of this all, you don't know if they're going to ask you to tell them what the men are or the women. So you want to have it labeled so that when you come up with your x, you can look up there and say, now wait, is that the answer to my problem? Or is that just the answer to what x is? And I got to use that to figure out the answer to the problem. Okay, hey Jasmine? Now it says, when the number of women is decreased by 2, how do you write that? 3x minus 2. Everybody got that?
Yeah.